Hello, everyone. This is the Social Media Current, and today I'm super excited to interview Daniel of Rich20Something. He was probably one of the first guys I started following when I decided to start my website and my business. So clearly, you can say I'm stoked about this interview. So I'll let Daniel take over, introduce himself to those of you who don't know him, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Lesia. Yeah, I don't have much to say except that I've been doing interesting creative work online for a while now, and I have a book out which is doing well and working on other projects, and happy to be helpful wherever I can be.
Awesome. So I think you're one of the most prominent millennial entrepreneurship advocates, if there is such a thing. So how did you get started with this, and what sprung you into this action and this kind of work?
Well, entrepreneurship is it's a choice, but it's also a calling. But I think that more than entrepreneurship, before entrepreneurship was a factor for me, it was just the idea of being free and not having to, and it's free outside of the traditional school system, free outside of the traditional work system, free outside of the box of culture. And I wanted to be able to do that in all areas of my life. And so when it comes to making money, it seemed to me like entrepreneurship was the obvious way to go. And so, it's something I've been interested in for a long time.
I see. So I think in the media, there's a widespread image of millennials being self-absorbed, lazy, needy. Do you often have to refute this notion, or do you even care about that?
Well, I think that describes a lot of generations, self-absorbed, needy, entitled. I don't think I think that's very descriptive of most people, and myself included at times. I'm sure you at times. It's not, you just described humanity, but I think that with what's happening with millennials is a little bit different, because millennials have one of the biggest age groups, in recent history, because our demographic stretches from 1982 to 2004. It's a very long demographic. It's 32 years, and so not only is it bigger than, let's say, Generation X, which is somewhere around the 70s and the 80s, and then the baby boomers before them in the late 40s into the 60s. We have a lot of people in our generation. We're the biggest generation, but we're also the last generation. Some of us. Before the internet boom, we're the last ones to see the world pre-internet. And so we have an interesting, different perspective on what's possible, because we've seen how quickly technology can change the world. And so because of that, we do often feel like we should be able to get things more quickly, because we've seen how quickly the world can change, and it's human nature to want to get a result as quickly as possible. But I don't think that we're any more entitled. I think that we are more empowered to do these things, to make these changes, because not only are we the last generation to see the transition from from analog to smartphone, but we're also now moving into real adulthood in this generation. I'm 29 now. I'm going to be 30, and I think it's safe to say that the opinions that we have about the world, about the economy. Mark Zuckerberg's a millennial. The opinions that we have about the world not only matter, but they deserve to be heard, because we're equal participants in the development of this culture. And so it's not that we're kids that don't know what we're doing anymore. That has been past for a while now, and we're aware enough to understand what's happening with climate change, what's happening with business. We can look at politics and see what's going on. We're not dumb. So I think a lot of the misconceptions about millennials being entitled or lazy, or all those things, some of that's cultural and demographic misunderstanding, because people who are not actively in the workforce like we are still see things the way that they were 20 or 30 years ago, when it was easy to go to school, get a job, get promoted. And so they look at our perspective and say, well, why would you want to skip steps? Why would you not go to school? It's the obvious choice. Before my grandmother died, she was encouraging me to get an MFA, a Master's in Fine Arts. She really wanted me to get a degree in writing if I wanted to write. And I said, but I have a book deal. Why would I need to get a Master's in writing if I have a book deal? The whole point of getting a degree in writing is so that you can hopefully get published. And I'm getting published. So we're in a generation now where our work and our creativity can be enough. If you're good enough, you can get on. And I think that it's harder for a lot of older generations to grasp, one, because there's a lot of missed opportunity in those generations, but then also just because it's very hard to understand the idea of not having to follow this path that really has only been something significant for the past 50 or 60 years. That whole path of go to school, get a job, get promoted, retire is really only about 50 or 60 years old after World War II. Before that, many countries, including the United States, were much more, impoverished is an over-exaggeration, but we didn't have as much money. And it's only been in the past few decades that we've been able to be relatively relaxed with our lifestyle in more affluent countries. And it's still not like that today. You go to India and, 3/4 of the people there won't have running water, in their house. And so we're coming from a perspective of just now having reached a certain amount of societal security over the past 50 or 60 years. And so our generation, our parents, and our grandparents are very happy with that. They want us to experience the same thing. But what we're telling them, we're in the fields and we're reporting that, hey, it's not like this anymore. The landscape is changing. And since they're not there with us to do the work, it's hard for them to see that. But it doesn't mean that it's not true. And it doesn't mean that just because it's hard to change that we don't have to change. If they're shutting down the automobile plant in Detroit and there 20,000 employees are losing their job in a day, we don't have a choice. We have to change. If newspapers are closing because people are reading things online, we have to change. So millennials are the harbingers. We're the canary in the coal mine saying, hey, there's something going on here. And because the older generations, for lack of better words, have completely fucked things up financially for a lot of countries, and just culturally, it's now our job to look at what's going on, make the necessary changes, and sometimes even when people don't agree with us.
I see. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but why do you think this generation has such, it's much more vivid, the desire for financial freedom, for time freedom, and this is a huge part of why this generation gets criticized for wanting all of those things without sacrificing time, health, or relationships.
We're obsessed with money and lifestyle and sex and consumerism because we can't think of anything better. I mean, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, it's worldwide, but it's also mostly in Western affluent countries. Okay, these are our concerns are not the world's concerns, and that's something to remember first and foremost. But that being said, think about the world that we live in. We already live in a world of incredible abundance. I'm not trying to go like secret woo-woo on you. I'm talking about like physical, like money in terms of like countries having wealth. In America, you can be poor, but it's not the same poor as in Kenya. It's different. It's different poor, and we need to get that perspective. And we look at the world around us, and we pretty much have everything we need. Most of us have refrigerators, so our food won't spoil. This is the first time in human history we've had leisure time. Like in the past 40 or 50 years, we have leisure time. We don't need to be in factories. We live in air-conditioned houses. We have cars. Most of us have smartphones with apps that can deliver anything to us. And I think that we're getting bored, and we've reached a point where we've gotten all of our basic needs taken care of. Most of us, back in the 20s, in the 30s, people would have killed for a factory job with a steady paycheck because it sure beat, having to go out there and dig a ditch. But now that we have, most people have relative security, meaning that there are people that are struggling, but it's not the same as it used to be. And there's a lot more general affluence because so many of us have reached the point where there's nothing else to really long for. We have to try to do as much as we possibly can. Well, I have all my basic needs taken care of. I need more money because that's going to do this. I mean, I need to have, I have basic transportation. I can use an iPhone to call a car, but I want a nicer car to drive because people will feel this way about me. So we are just reaching for things that we're hoping will make us feel a little bit better, when in reality we need to be doing meaningful work that contributes to society, rather than trying to basically continually feed our own ego, which never ends up working.
Right. So you've just published a book which is called Rich20Something. Congratulations on that. I think that was a huge success. So tell us more about the book and what it talks about.
Well, the reviews are saying that my book has been one of the easiest reads they've ever read. These are what reviewers are saying. They're saying that I never read books and I never finish books, and I finished your book in 2 days. And it's because it's the most honest, accessible thing I've ever written. It's a first-person account of what it took me, just my own example, to go from a restaurant to opening up a few different businesses, to having them become successful, and then to moving on to more online leadership and how that worked. And then along the way, I talk about the story, I pull back the curtain, I show the lessons, and then I also have some contributions from friends of mine who've done well in their own respect. And it's created a good book. It has, over 200 5-star reviews on Amazon. We hit number 11 on New York Times list. It's in bookstores all over the world. It's in the airports in Singapore. It's in public libraries in France. It's making its rounds.
So one thing you talk a lot in the book, and I think you have courses for both freelancers and solopreneurs. What's the difference for you?
Between what and what?
What for you differentiates freelancer from solopreneur?
Well, I think a better comparison is freelancer to entrepreneur. Similar terminology, but slightly different meaning. Freelancers are people who develop a useful skill, solve a problem, and get paid for it by clients. And I think this is a great first place to start. Some people stay freelancers forever, and that's fine. And you can make a lot of money as a freelancer. You can be a millionaire freelancer if that's your thing. But it's still trading time for dollars, which is okay, because a lot of times you can charge a lot more than you would at a regular job. And freelancing requires you to really become good at what it is that you want to help people with, and really find problems to solve. In our programs, we have everyone from UX and UI designers with mobile apps to personal chefs to trainers. And what they have in common is that they understand that what they're doing serves a need, and they find people who need that, and they do a really good job. And an entrepreneur, on the other hand, builds something bigger than them. This is something I learned from Seth Godin. An entrepreneur builds a structure such that if they leave it, they're not required to run it. They have the vision, they know the implementation, they create the system, but then the system runs itself. And that's something that's a sellable asset. In terms of what an entrepreneur does, an entrepreneur creates something that's not just about them. And they're both great paths. I think freelancing leads to entrepreneurship, but neither one is better than the other.
I see. So in your book, you talk a lot about, obviously, technology and the abundance of information online. And so it's been easier than ever to start your own business with little to no money. Do you think that this also serves as a distraction? Is there such a thing as too much information and too much advice out there? Is there a point where you just need to stop reading and start doing stuff?
Yeah, and that point is usually a lot sooner than you think. So, funny story, I spent so much time putting together the book. It probably took about a minimum of 2 years from my life, most likely 3, because I started working on it at the end of 2014, just thinking about what it would be like. I got my agent in 15. We also got the book deal very end of 15. We got the book deal. I spent all of 16 working on it and finishing it up and editing it. And it was out in 17. And I learned a lot in that process. But the place where I learned the most was after the book had been released. Getting the feedback, seeing what was good, seeing what wasn't good, thinking about the impact that it had, And so it just occurs to me that the benefit of doing the work is shipping it. It's not enough to research it. You're only in stage one. It's not enough to just research it and do the work. You have to then ship it. So if you're still in the sandbox playing with the toys and you haven't built anything, then you're not actually doing the work. And the work only stops when you're done shipping it and you've then gotten a response. Now, it's not your job to perfect the work in your research so that hopefully you'll get a great response. Obviously, you want to do your best work, but it's not your job to try to create something that's so perfect that you won't get a negative reaction. This is what most people do. They spend, months, weeks, months, years tweaking, pruning, prodding, lining their ducks up, and then they can't figure out a way to produce the work without possibly getting some criticism or possibly doing something that fails. So they don't do it. I have a friend who was going to put out a course 2 years ago on how to get jobs on Upwork. And 2 years ago we talked about it, and he never ended up putting it out. And I just talked to him today, and I said, well, what are you working on right now? He was talking about a new course he wanted to put out. And I said, well, what happened to the old course? He says, oh, yeah, I finished it. I just never put it out. I said, well, you didn't do your job. And he of course he said, well, it's it was 2 years ago. The course is old. I said, yeah, you've missed the opportunity, but you have to ship. You didn't finish it. You just thought it up and made something, but you didn't finish the work. And I think that if more people realize that the work is not in the research, the work is not even in the creation, it's in the shipping and it's in the feedback, then there'll be less confusion about how much progress we're actually making.
So do you think perfectionism or fear of being rejected is what a lot of, and especially I think with millennials, a lot of people say that we get medals for participation.
I never got one of those. I don't know what they're talking about.
Do you think that's a big problem that stops a lot of people from doing anything at all?
No, I think the people that are going to do work mostly do it anyway. I think that what's now happening is it's choice paralysis. We can do anything. There's the distance between the means of production and the means of distribution have drastically diminished to the point where it really just takes one person. I went into the studio today, and for $120, I recorded a series of lectures, about 45 minutes long. I'm going to put it up on Spotify and iTunes in the next couple of days. I went on Canva and I produced an album cover for free. It cost me $1 actually. I bought a stock photo. And I'm going to put an album out. I mean, it's just a series of lectures. It's just to keep myself doing creative work as I'm working on my other projects. And it cost me almost no money. Yet Spotify has 100 million users. You can, if you have an idea, rather than have it get manufactured, which will cost thousands of dollars, used to cost thousands of dollars to source this and manufacture it, you can print a small run with a 3D printer of a product you're developing. If you have a great idea, you can put it on a Kickstarter, and people who have no idea who you are will pay you to produce it. If you have an idea for a blog post, you can write it, and 50 million people can see it. And that's scary, because of all those things you could do, which one are you going to do? And are you going to finish? And I think what people are looking for is they're looking for which work can I do that will either be immediately successful or there's a clear path to having this hit. And again, you get the most benefit from the releasing of the product, not from the creation. And there is no way to ensure any type of success. You're not guaranteed that, but you are now guaranteed pretty much unlimited shots. And you'll find that the unlimited shots, because of the fact that it doesn't cost really money to do a lot of things that it used to cost, because of the fact that the internet makes things instantly connectable, because of the fact that a lot of the barriers are down, because you get infinite shots, if you take 100 shots, I bet you'll get one. And if you take one, well, who knows if you're going to make it.
So do you think that's a big problem, again, of today's generation, and especially I think it's big in digital marketing, self-improvement industry. There seems to be this notion of overnight success. You find somebody and they claim that they can give you their swap files for six-figure business and all of that stuff. And a lot of people seem to believe that stuff, that unless you're successful overnight, then you're probably just a failure and you need to abandon this idea altogether. Do you think there's a big space and a big issue with that, or again, is this just kind of
Well,
part of the journey?
no one's using the word overnight success because that's a scammy word. No one uses that. But what they will say is in 6 weeks or here, my swipe file, like you said. I just read one of these the other day. Frank Kern sent me one. I mean, you'll read things that won't say overnight, but they'll give you either unrealistic expectations of how much you could make, unrealistic expectations of how much time it could take,
How much work it will take.
how much work it takes. They'll distort the actual result of like profit versus revenue. Like you can make $50,000, but it's how much of it are you keeping? There's all these things. And I think that that's a marketing tool, but it's not a good marketing tool. And I think that more and more people are seeing now that the things that they're trying, because of the fact that the market is so saturated, they're seeing that these things aren't working. But the real bad thing is that they think it's their fault. They think it's them. They think that there was a proven system that worked for a lot of other people, and for them it just didn't work. And it's just not like that. It's just not like that. It just takes a long time. And in the macro sense, it might not be a long time. It might take 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 years, which isn't that long if you zoom out. But when you have to live that every day, and every day you have to be challenged to do this creative work, which you're not sure if it will pay off, and the requirement is that you show up whether you want to or not, and you're not sure if showing up will make a difference, that's when it's hard. 3 years is not a long time, but 900 plus days of uncertainty and anxiety is. And so that's what the problem is.
Do you think overwhelm and fear of rejection, of failure, of not this thing succeeding and wasting time, do you have any tools on how to get over this? Because this is a big part of entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to redefine what constitutes failure. There's failing and there's failure. Failing is a necessary process to eliminate what doesn't work. I mean, unless you immediately knock it out of the park the first time, it's necessary that you would fail so that you can figure out that that didn't work. Now, how likely are you to get anything right on the first time? How likely are you to swipe right on the best Tinder date and end up marrying them? How likely are you to make it right on time for the movie that you want to see? It just doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen like that anywhere else in the universe. Why would it happen in entrepreneurship? Yet there's this idea that you get a limited amount of bullets, or that 90% of businesses fail, or all these things. Failing is a necessary aspect on the road. It's not something that you avoid. You can't. It's the doorway. You go through it. Failure is when you give up because you failed. Failure is when you say, too much failing, I'm done. That's failure. And then you have to figure out, well, the real question is, when do I quit? When is the right time to quit? And here's what I'll say. There are 2 times when it's okay to quit. First time is when you've done your research, you've done your analysis and your due diligence, and you haven't started the project you want to work on yet. And I'm talking about all projects. You haven't started your project yet. You've done the analysis and said, you know what, this isn't worth my time. I wouldn't like to do this. Now, the caveat here is you don't spend years making this decision. You do an honest assessment and decide. You look at the honest outcome, and not how likely am I to make money with this, but how likely am I to enjoy doing this work long enough to deserve to be one of the best that gets paid the best for it. How likely am I to want to continue long enough with this work that I should deserve to be paid the rate that I think I want right now? So if the first answer to that question is yes, if you decide to go for it, then you should see it all the way through the end. Now, the second time when it's okay to quit is when you've completed the project and it's time to move on. A lot of people get attached to projects and they confuse the project with their own identity. People ask me, what are you going to do when you turn 30? Rich 20-something. What's that about? If I had $1 for every person that asked me that, I'd actually be a rich 20-something. And after you've completed a project, it's perfectly okay to wipe your hands of it, dust your hands of it, and move on. Rich 20-something is a project. And it's an idea that deserves my attention, and I'm going to give it my attention for a few more years, and then I'm going to move on. And one day you're going to get an email from Daniel@DanielDiPiazza.com or whatever I'm doing, and if you want to stay, you're welcome to. But it's just a project. And so after you've completed your work, then move on to make room in your heart and in your mind for more stuff. Now, the time when it's not okay to quit is in the middle. And this is when most people quit. And they quit because they're scared. And they quit because it might not work. And they quit because they're in the middle of several failures and they're afraid of failing completely. If you quit when you're in the middle, you've done yourself 2 disservices. One, you spent a lot of momentum and energy getting to the middle, and then you lose all that progress. You've purchased a few samples of whatever it is you're going to sell. You've put in 20 hours of research. You've made a few phone calls. And after all that, you quit. You're already halfway through. You're already a quarter way through. You're already working on the process. You trash the project. You throw it away. So you've done yourself a disservice there. And not only did you waste the momentum, but you'll never see what could have happened if you finished. So you rob yourself of the opportunity to maybe this have been your one. And it takes several completed, shipped projects to figure out what that is. And you're robbing yourself of the lesson if you don't get feedback from your work in the real world, if it just stays up here, stays on your computer. So it's not okay to quit then.
So I also wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about the other big aspect of your book, and that is networking and building your network. And I've seen a lot of your blog posts and videos where you credit a lot of your success to connections that you had. So tell us more about that, and how can someone who was not born into influential family, how can they build their connections and build this super powerful network?
Well, I wasn't born. My mom works for an insurance company, and my dad works delivering packages. I mean, I wasn't born into a super influential family. A lot of people who look like me in the United States were not born into super influential families. So that being said, the first thing you have to remember is that if you want people to be interested in you, you have to become more interesting, and you have to also be interested in them. So one of the things that helped me to become a better networker, and I don't like to think of it like that, sounds sleazy, but one of the things that helped me to become a better networker is purposely engaging in experiences that didn't necessarily have an immediate monetary impact on me, that were just creative, that made me a deeper, more well-rounded person. So I've shot movies, and I've written film scripts and acted. I've traveled all over the world. This was in college. Traveled all over the world and spoke a few different languages. I play some instruments. I trained jiu-jitsu, and I've done bodybuilding shows. I went to the honors college. I have all these different interesting things I've done in my life, and that gives me a reservoir of things to talk about. A lot of Americans are so sheltered. They never leave the U.S. They never even leave their state. Some of them never even leave their hometown. They don't talk about anything that their family doesn't talk about. They don't care about anything that their friends don't care about. They only believe what they see on TV. They never do any investigative research for themselves. They never expose themselves to new experiences. I went skydiving the other day. It's something else to talk about. It's fun. They never listen to anything philosophical. So they don't have anything to offer. And so it's not too hard to stand out when you have real things to talk about. And when you improve your own quality, when you improve the quality of your experiences in your life, immediately you become more interesting. And that makes it easier to connect with people. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to be interested. Despite the fact that you have all these awesome experiences, people much more remember you when you've allowed them to talk about themselves. So you're asking them questions, you're listening, and you're giving your feedback. You'd be surprised how often people would say, wow, that was such a great conversation, and you haven't done any talking. It's been mostly them. And that's fine. You have to be comfortable with listening. Some of us are so, and I was like this for a long time too. My dad is still like this. He's over talk. He talks over people. I hate that. And I used to be like that too. Now I've become more comfortable with just sitting in silence the whole time, not immediately thinking of my next line that I want to say, actually listening. This is something that I learned in acting class, which is why acting class is so good. It teaches you how to actually listen and respond in real time to people, not just with the line. Even if you know what you want to say, not responding like a robot, listening and responding with the correct inflection. And over time, I got better with this with interviews. So this has been useful for me as well. Being a good conversationalist, it's a skill. People don't like when you talk about yourself the whole time unless you're in an interview situation like this. And then after that, after you become more interesting and learn how to be a better communicator with people, then it's up to you to put yourself in situations where those people are. So, for instance, if you want to be around people who are doing what you want to do, then you have to go to where they are. If you live in Arkansas, where are you taping this from?
Denver, Colorado.
Okay, you're in Denver. Denver is actually a pretty hot, like, happening city. Okay, but like if you wanted to get into the marijuana business, if you want to get in the cannabis industry, it'd be a great place. If you want to get into tech finance, you'd be in San Francisco. You wouldn't try to make it happen from Denver. You could, but it's better to go where the people are. And the more you become an interesting person, become someone that can really talk to people and put yourself around those people, those connections naturally start to form. Then you build friendships, and then it's long term. A lot of the things that are now, the relationships that are now bearing fruit are 5 or 6 year old relationships on my part. And I haven't asked for anything yet, or I asked them to help me promote the book. But we're so obsessed with what we can get that we oftentimes jump the gun. As soon as we meet someone, we think, oh, how can they help me? Who can they connect me with? What can I do with this? Don't do anything with it.
So I think a lot of influencers and famous people are really busy. So some people are even afraid to approach them, and other people, as soon as they get the chance, like you said, jump the gun and like start asking for business advice or business investment or any of that sort of stuff. So how do you make it really personable and like a true connection, even if you've met them and you have 5-10 minutes to talk to them at the conference they're speaking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. The thing is, one thing I've learned is that there are different techniques for becoming a better networker. But overall, what really works is just having something genuinely in common with them, which is why it's so important to have a varied amount of experiences, because then you'll always have something to talk about. Because I've been to all these different countries, if I see someone who's either in that country or been there or from there, I can talk about that. There's something to do. Since I've tried all these different things, there's always something to talk about. And I find that now the best approach to networking isn't like trying to say. It's kind of like okay. When I was in high school, I was really into like reading things about attraction and picking up girls, like how will I get better at picking up girls. And the articles used to say things like, oh, have more self-confidence, improve your posture, things work on your psychology. And I was like, yeah, I don't care about that stuff. Give me the pickup lines. Like, what's the line I should say? And I completely missed the point. And so this is kind of like the same thing with networking, pickup lines. What's the line I can say that's going to impress someone? It's going to make them say, wow, I would love to get your phone number and stay in contact with you. And then from that point, what would you say? If you got Bill Gates' phone number or Elon Musk's phone number, what would you do with it? You have nothing to do with it. There are people who I've been offered to through friends of mine to get connected to who are really famous people, but I don't have anything to say to them. So if I had something, then it would be relevant enough to be worth their time and worth mine. But I don't just go looking for famous people to try to connect with them because they're famous. What can I do for them? What can they do for me? You know? So I think that it's less important how many influential connections you make and more important that you make the right ones. Because really, it's only about 3 or 4 people who have been like, I mean, a lot of people, but like people who've given me critical introductions to get to me to where I am now, 5 or less. People along the way help out, and they all contribute. Lots of people helped me to launch this book. It took a ton of effort. But in terms of like getting an agent, getting in there, getting my first break, 5 or less people. And so you have to be able to find those right people and not be so worried at the conference with trying to get 10 business cards and more worried about who's the one person who I might have a great conversation with, who I think might be helpful to me and I could be helpful to them. I go to a lot of these parties in LA now, and I see there's a ton of people there and they're all very interesting. But I don't go and try to shake 10,000 hands. I find 4 or 5 people that night and we have some good conversations, and from that we'll see what happens.
Social media is always deemed like the place to be for introverted entrepreneurs because you don't have that person-to-person, face-to-face contact, and it seems just easier to type on your computer this message that has a potential to reach thousands, if not millions of people. Do you think social media can replace networking or building those real connections? And if not, like, how can you still leverage the power of social media?
Well, social media is a tool. It's not a replacement for anything. It's, you know, you need a hammer and a screwdriver and a saw. They're just tools. And my personal view on social media right now is I am dramatically scaling back the amount that I'm doing it, even though I have, you know, 250,000 followers on Instagram, a couple 100,000 across the other networks, because I've realized now that although it is a good way to be seen and get noticed, it doesn't make people trust you more necessarily. Because there are so many talking heads, because everyone has a solution, because there's so much noise, because in the social media echo chamber, you're just trying to say whatever you can to get the likes and views and shares, even if you don't really believe about 24/7 hustle. If you say it and it gets a lot of likes, that feels good. And that makes you feel like there's some validity to what you're saying. And so that's why social media has so many copycats, because everyone's just saying the next thing that seems like it would be relevant. And so it might be easier to get seen to a certain extent, but it doesn't make people trust you. And it doesn't mean that having a large social media following is going to make money at all. And it doesn't mean that you're going to attract the people that you want to attract just because you have a big megaphone. And we had to learn that the hard way. You know, I had at the beginning of the year 150,000 people on my email list, and recently I cut 100,000 people off of it. Cut them off. And of those 50,000 or so that are left, there's about 10,000 people there. Well, actually, let's think of it like this. Of those 50,000, anyone listening, if you guys know Madison Square Garden in New York, very famous arena in New York, if you're a comedian or a singer or an actor and you make it to Madison Square Garden, you've made it. And it holds 21,000 people at full capacity. So if my email list is 50,000 people, that's 2.5 Madison Square Gardens. 2.5. Those are real people with families and lives and stories and problems and successes and all this stuff. And if I can't get the job done with 50,000 with 2 Madison Square Gardens, I'm doing it wrong. Of those 50,000 people, 10,000 people, about 11,000, are superfans. They open every email. They respond. If I ask them something, they'll tell me. And those 10,000 people are probably still enough with the right ammunition to take over a city. It's a lot. Our vision of what's a lot of people is skewed because Kim Kardashian has 100 million followers, because there are billion and trillion dollar companies now. And so our minds are set to the wrong parameters of what is a lot of people. What's going to move the needle? If you have 500 people on an email list, can you imagine 500 fucking people? It's a lot of people. That if you had 500 people at a talk show up to hear you talk, wouldn't that be impressive? Not only is 50,000 people 2.5 times the size of Madison Square Garden, but you also have a better connection to those people, because if you try to talk in an auditorium, it's loud, it echoes, people aren't listening, they're eating popcorn, they're on their phones. You're in their inbox directly. You probably get a better attention span from your inbox people than you do from Madison Square Garden. So all that to say, social media is great, but it's a game. And I don't want to play games. I want to do real shit. I want to do real creative work that a small amount of people care about, because those people will pass it on. So you can use it as a tool to get attention, but your goal should always be not just to get attention, but to get trust. And trust takes showing up day after day with your work, not trying to do things that go viral because they have great pictures. I had a picture on my Facebook page a year and a half ago, a year and a half ago. It was a Leonardo DiCaprio meme with some catchy quote. And some big page shared it. I don't know what happened. And I got like 12,000 followers in a week on Facebook. And now that page is dead because those people came for the memes. They came for the memes, and when I published the articles, they didn't care. And so it's not about numbers. We need to think smaller. We need to think smaller and do more meaningful work.
So I'm trying to get behind the scenes a little bit on the Rich20Something.
Sure.
If you don't mind me asking, why did you cut your email list so much?
Well, I mean, we just had people who signed up at one time or another to get something free from me, and probably over the past couple of years, we've had, 300,000 or 400,000 people cycle in and out of the email list. But we had people who signed up at one point to get something for free, a free download, a PDF, or they saw a video or their friend told them about it. And that's great. But I look at the email, and if they haven't opened it in 3 months, it's not worth it for me to keep sending them. Not only does it cost me money, it clutters up their inbox, they don't care about it, and it distorts my ability to see the people who matter. When I send to 150,000 people and 10,000 people open, I don't know who those people are. And I don't have any indication of whether or not that was a good email, because between 10,000 people out of 50,000 and 10,000 out of 150,000, the statistics are way different, even though it's the same amount of people opening.
Right.
When I send to when I would send to an email list of 150K, I would get like a 10% open rate maybe. So maybe 10 to 15,000 people would open it. 10% open rate is very standard. It's not good. It's not something. It's not good. It's okay. It's not great. When I send to 50,000, I'll get like a 20% open rate.
Right.
Not bad. I can see who's actually clicking. When I send to that list of 11,000 people, the people who really care, I'll get a 50% open rate. 1 out of 2 people. So that means out of 11,000 people, again, let's put it in perspective. 11,000 human beings, 1 out of 2 of those will open it. Now I can see what emails are good. Now I can see what my core fans want. And when I sell something, 90% of those sales will come from those 11,000 people.
Makes sense.
That's why I cut it.
So to wrap it up, what would be one biggest lesson you've learned in this whole journey that you wished you knew earlier, or you would want to share with people who may be struggling to build their business, or they're building their business, but of course there are always little roadblocks on the way? What would you say to those people, and what lesson would you share?
Ship early, ship often, search for feedback, and realize that you're not done with the project until other people can hold it in their hands, whatever way that is, depending on what you're doing, till other people can physically examine it. Because at the end of the day, we're doing work that's going to benefit people. Now there are these big, there are oil companies and these, airlines and all these huge companies that sometimes rely on so much data that they can't see the people. But the remarkable companies, big or small, the ones that, change the world or the ones that just change a community, are the ones that see all their interactions with their clients as human-to-human interactions. And not only that, these companies help facilitate not only their connection from the company to the person, but from person to person to create a community. Facebook isn't about you talking to Mark Zuckerberg. It's about you talking to your aunt. It's about you talking to your best friend from college. Mark Zuckerberg's probably still listening, but it's not about that. And so if we can create things that treat our clients and customers like humans, it's going to be much more likely that they'll do the hard work of sharing it without us having to ask them. And that's a sure way for growth, no matter what type of growth hacks you use.
That was an awesome response. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was great.